There is a question that has haunted humanity since the first moment consciousness turned inward and recognized itself in another's eyes. A question whispered in the silence between heartbeats, carved into ancient temple walls and written across the margins of every love letter ever penned. Why does love hurt? Not the casual disappointment of unmet expectations, not the surface scratches of minor conflicts, but the deep, shattering, soul-crushing pain that makes us question everything we thought we knew about ourselves. The kind of wound that doesn't bleed, but somehow leaves us feeling more broken than any physical injury ever could. Picture this moment with me. You're standing in a room you thought you knew. The walls are familiar. The light falls in patterns you've memorized, and then someone walks in, someone whose presence somehow rearranges the very architecture of your being. In their eyes, you see something that both terrifies and compels you, a mirror, a promise, a threat. And in that instant, without conscious decision, you begin the most dangerous journey a human being can undertake. You begin to love. What you don't know yet, what none of us know in those intoxicating early moments, is that you've just opened a door to the deepest caverns of your own psyche, the places where your most ancient wounds sleep, the chambers where your earliest abandonments echo, the dungeons where your unloved child self still waits, hoping, always hoping, that this time will be different. Love, you see, is not merely an emotion. It is an archaeological excavation of the self. The great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung once observed that we don't have relationships. We have collisions of unconscious worlds. Two inner universes, each carrying the accumulated debris of every love, every loss, every moment of connection and disconnection since birth, come crashing together. And in that collision, something remarkable happens. Every wound we thought we'd buried rises to the surface. Every need we learned to suppress suddenly screams for attention. Every way we were not loved as children becomes the blueprint for how we expect not to be loved as adults. The person we love becomes, through a kind of psychological alchemy we barely understand, the perfect key to unlock our deepest pain. Not because they are cruel, not because they are uniquely flawed, but because love itself is the trigger. Connection is the catalyst. Intimacy is the earthquake that reveals the fault lines we've been standing on all along. But here's the paradox that will frame everything we explore together in the next 2 hours. The wound is not a mistake. The pain is not evidence that we've chosen wrong or loved poorly. The deepest truth about human existence is that we must be broken open to become whole. We must allow love to shatter us if we are ever to discover who we really are beneath the armor we've built. The question isn't whether love will wound us. The question is whether we have the courage to let those wounds become the doorway to our transformation. Tonight, we embark on a journey into the hidden architecture of human intimacy. We'll travel through the landscapes of attachment and abandonment, projection and reflection, vulnerability and defense. We'll encounter the ghosts of our childhood selves, the shadow figures of our unconscious minds, and the strange, beautiful, terrifying territory where two people attempt the impossible act of truly seeing each other. We'll explore why the person who makes us feel most alive can also make us feel most afraid. Why the relationship that promises our healing often activates our deepest hurt. Why love, the force we're told will save us, so often feels like the very thing destroying us. But more than that, we'll discover what these wounds are trying to tell us, what they're trying to teach us, and how, if we're brave enough to listen, they might be the greatest gift we ever receive. The ancient Greeks told a story about Eros, the god of love, carrying two kinds of arrows. One arrow caused love, sudden, intoxicating, irresistible. The other caused flight, repulsion, the desperate need to escape. What they understood, in their symbolic wisdom, is that love and wounding are not opposites. They are two faces of the same force. To love is to give another person the power to hurt you and trust that they won't. But here's what no one tells you: they will. Not because they're malicious, but because they're human. Because they carry their own wounds. Because in the funhouse mirror of intimate relationship, we don't see each other as we are. We see each other through the lens of every person who hurt us before. We project our past onto the present. We mistake our partner for our parent. We react to ancient abandonment as if it's happening right now. And in doing so, we create the very rejection we fear most. This is the tragedy and the opportunity of human love. The mystics knew it, the poets sensed it, the psychologists mapped it, and now neuroscience is confirming what wisdom traditions have taught for millennia. Our capacity for love and our capacity for pain occupy the same neural territory. The brain regions that light up in passionate love are adjacent to those activated in grief and loss. The neurochemistry of bonding is inseparable from the neurochemistry of withdrawal and despair. We are wired for connection, yes, but we are also wired to protect ourselves from the vulnerability that connection requires. And that protection, that armor we build around our hearts, becomes the very thing that prevents us from receiving the love we desperately seek. So we find ourselves in an impossible bind. We need love to survive. We need connection to become fully human. But the act of opening to love activates every wound, every fear, every early experience that taught us the world wasn't safe and people couldn't be trusted. What do we do with this? How do we navigate the contradiction at the heart of our existence, that the thing we need most is the thing that hurts most? The answer, I believe, lies not in avoiding the wound, but in understanding it. Not in protecting ourselves from pain, but in recognizing what that pain is revealing. The deepest wounds of love are not random. They are not cruel accidents of fate. They are, in a very real sense, messages from the deepest parts of ourselves, parts that have been waiting our entire lives to be seen, to be heard, to be finally, fully, courageously loved. Not by another person, but by us. The wound that love triggers is the wound that love came to heal. But first, we must be willing to see it, to feel it, to understand its origins and its architecture. This is the journey we're about to take together, a descent into the underworld of the heart, an exploration of why we hurt the way we hurt, love the way we love, and keep repeating patterns we swore we'd never repeat. And if we're brave enough to see it through, we might discover that our deepest wounds contain our greatest wisdom, that the pain we've been running from is actually the path we need to walk, and that love, in its infinite complexity, is not here to complete us or save us, but to show us who we've been all along beneath the layers of protection and pretense. Let us begin at the beginning, with the first wound, the first separation, the first moment a human being ever learned that love and loss are inseparable companions on the strange journey of consciousness. Let us begin with birth and attachment and the invisible architecture of need that shapes everything that follows. In the beginning, there was no separation. For 9 months, you existed in a state that you will spend the rest of your life unconsciously trying to recreate. Perfect union, seamless connection. The boundaries between self and other dissolved in the warm darkness of prenatal existence. Every need met before you knew you had it. Every comfort provided without asking. You floated in an ocean of belonging, where mother and child were not two beings but one system, one heartbeat, one shared dream of becoming. And then, in a moment of violence disguised as miracle, you were expelled from paradise. The first breath is a scream, the first sensation is separation. The pristine unity of the womb gives way to the harsh reality of independent existence. Cold air, bright lights, the shocking recognition that you are a separate being, vulnerable and small, dependent on forces outside yourself for survival. This is the primal wound, the original separation, and whether we remember it or not, it writes itself into the deepest code of our being. The British psychoanalyst John Bowlby spent decades studying what happens next, how an infant, thrust into the terrifying independence of existence, learns to navigate the fundamental question of human life. Can I trust that my needs will be met? Can I rely on connection? Is the world, our people, safe? He called it attachment theory, and it would revolutionize our understanding of human relationships. Bowlby observed that infants develop what he called internal working models of relationships based on their early experiences with caregivers. If a child cries and someone comes, consistently, lovingly, attentively, the child learns a profound lesson. I matter. My needs are important. Connection is reliable. The world is fundamentally safe. But if the response is inconsistent, unpredictable, or absent, the child learns something else entirely. Picture a baby crying in the night. Not a casual whimper, but the full-throated wail of existential distress. In that moment, the baby is not simply hungry or uncomfortable. The baby is experiencing something far more primal, the terror of abandonment. The fear that the connection to life itself, embodied in the caregiver, might not return. If someone responds quickly and sensitively, the terror subsides. The baby learns, I am safe, I am seen, I am not alone. But what if no one comes? What if the response is delayed, irritated, mechanical? What if the caregiver is present in body but absent in presence, looking at their phone distracted, emotionally unavailable? The baby still learns, but the lesson is different. The lesson becomes, my needs are too much. My emotions are overwhelming. I must not show my true self if I want to maintain connection. Love is conditional. Safety is uncertain. And somewhere deep in the architecture of the developing brain, a blueprint is created. A blueprint that will shape every relationship that follows. The neuroscience here is stunning. In the first 3 years of life, the human brain undergoes more development than it will in any equivalent period. Over 1 million neural connections are formed every second, and the primary architect of this neural construction is relationship. Specifically, the quality of attunement between infant and caregiver. When a parent looks into a baby's eyes and the baby looks back, something extraordinary happens. Their nervous systems synchronize. The baby's heart rate begins to match the parent's. Stress hormones decrease. Oxytocin, the bonding neurochemical, floods both brains. They enter what developmental psychologists call a dyadic state of consciousness. 2 nervous systems functioning as one. This is the foundation of secure attachment. The baby learns, at a level far deeper than language, that they are worthy of attention, that their internal states matter, that another person can be counted on to help regulate overwhelming emotion. But this same mechanism, this profound capacity for co-regulation, becomes the doorway to our deepest vulnerability, because we never outgrow it. Here's what most people don't understand about attachment. It's not just a childhood phenomenon. The attachment system remains active throughout our entire lives. The same neural circuitry that made us reach for our mother when we were afraid makes us reach for our partner when we're anxious. The same desperate need for proximity and reassurance that we felt as infants gets triggered in adult relationships. When we fall in love, we don't just form a romantic relationship. We form an attachment bond. The person we love becomes, in the language of attachment theory, our safe haven and our secure base. The one we turn to in distress, the one whose presence regulates our nervous system, the one who, simply by being there, makes the world feel manageable. This is beautiful. This is the bonding force that allows us to build partnerships and families and communities. This is love in its most fundamental form, 2 nervous systems learning to dance together, to co-regulate, to create a shared sense of safety in an uncertain world. But here's the problem. If our early attachment experiences were inconsistent, unpredictable, or traumatic, our attachment system develops in a distorted way, and that distortion shapes everything. Let me tell you about the 4 attachment styles that emerge from those early experiences, because understanding them is like being handed a map to the labyrinth of your own relationship patterns. First, there's secure attachment. About 50% of people develop this style. These are the individuals who had caregivers who were consistently responsive, emotionally available, and attuned. As adults, they find intimacy relatively comfortable. They can be vulnerable without excessive fear. They trust that others will be there for them, but they also have a strong sense of self-worth that doesn't depend entirely on relationship. When conflict arises, they can communicate clearly and work toward resolution. They make it look easy, these securely attached souls, because for them, it is. Love doesn't trigger landmines of ancient abandonment. Connection doesn't activate primal terror. They learned early that attachment is safe, and they carry that knowledge like a treasured inheritance. But then there are the rest of us. About 20% of people develop what's called anxious or preoccupied attachment. These are the children whose caregivers were inconsistent, sometimes warm and responsive, sometimes cold and withdrawn. The child never knew which version of the parent would show up, so they learned to become hypervigilant, to constantly monitor the emotional temperature of the relationship, to do whatever it took to maintain connection, because losing it was too terrifying to contemplate. As adults, anxiously attached people bring this same intensity to romance. They feel everything deeply. They fall in love hard and fast. They need constant reassurance that their partner still cares. A delayed text message becomes evidence of abandonment. Any hint of distance triggers panic. They are the ones who ask, "Do you still love me?" Even when nothing has changed. Because deep down, they're still that child, uncertain of whether the caregiver will return. Their wound is the wound of inconsistency. They learned that love is unpredictable, that connection requires constant effort, that they must pursue and please and perform to be worthy of attention. And so they bring this exhausting dance to every relationship, often pushing away the very love they desperately seek by needing too much, too intensely, too soon. Then there's avoidant or dismissive attachment, developed by another 20%. These were the children whose caregivers were consistently unavailable, emotionally distant, uncomfortable with vulnerability, perhaps even rejecting of emotional needs. These children learned a different lesson. Don't need anyone. Don't show weakness. Independence is safety. As adults, avoidant people are the fortress builders. They value autonomy above all else. They're uncomfortable with too much closeness, with vulnerability, with dependence. When things get emotionally intense, their instinct is to create space, to retreat, to protect themselves by maintaining distance. They often choose partners who want more intimacy than they're comfortable giving, then feel suffocated by those very needs. Their wound is the wound of dismissal. They learn that emotional needs are weakness, that vulnerability leads to rejection, that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. So they built walls so high that even they forget they're lonely inside them. And finally, there's the most complex and painful style, disorganized attachment. This develops when a caregiver is not just unavailable, but frightening, when the source of comfort is also the source of fear, when a child needs to seek safety from the very person who is dangerous. It's a psychological impossibility, an unsolvable paradox that fractures the developing self. As adults, people with disorganized attachment swing between desperate need for connection and terrified avoidance of it. They simultaneously crave and fear intimacy. Their relationships are characterized by chaos, by sudden shifts between idealizing and devaluing their partner, by a constant state of dysregulation. They are living in the aftermath of a fundamental betrayal. The person who was supposed to protect them was the threat. These are not categories of human value. They are not permanent states. They are simply maps of how we learn to navigate the impossible terrain of needing others while being separate individuals. They are the scars of our earliest relationships, still shaping the landscape of our hearts. And here's why this matters so profoundly. When we fall in love as adults, we don't just bring ourselves to the relationship. We bring our entire attachment history. Every moment we waited for comfort that didn't come. Every time we reached out and found no one there. Every wound of inconsistency, dismissal, or betrayal. We bring the ghost of every person who failed to love us properly. And we unconsciously expect our partner to fail in the same ways. This is what psychologists call repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate our earliest relational patterns even when they caused us pain. The anxiously attached person often falls in love with someone avoidant, unconsciously seeking to win the love they couldn't get from an emotionally distant parent. The avoidant person often chooses someone anxious, unconsciously seeking a pursuer who will tolerate their need for distance. We don't do this consciously. We do it because our attachment system is seeking resolution. The wounded part of us believes that if we can just get this person to love us properly, to be consistent, to be present, to be safe, we can finally heal the original wound. But here's the devastating truth. We can't. Not that way. Because the wound isn't in the present relationship. The wound is in us. And until we see it, understand it, and learn to provide for ourselves what we needed but never received, we will keep casting our partner in the role of the original wounder and setting them up to fail. Carl Jung spoke of something he called the projection process. He observed that we don't see people as they are. We see them through the lens of our own unconscious material. Every person we encounter becomes a screen onto which we project our inner world, our hopes, fears, unmet needs, and unfinished business. In casual relationships, this isn't particularly dangerous, but in intimate relationships, in love, projection becomes the primary mechanism through which we relate. We fall in love not with who the person actually is, but with who we need them to be. We see them as the answer to our loneliness, the solution to our incompleteness, the parent who will finally love us right. And for a while, if we're lucky, they play the role. The early stages of romantic love are characterized by what psychologists call idealization. We see only the good. We ignore the warning signs. Our brain is flooded with dopamine and oxytocin, creating a state of temporary madness that feels like bliss. We merge with the other person, losing our boundaries, projecting perfection onto them. This is the honeymoon phase, the state of beautiful delusion where we believe we've finally found the one who will make everything right. But it can't last. It was never real. And when it ends, when reality intrudes, when the projection shatters, when we finally see the actual human being in front of us with all their flaws and limitations and their own wounds, that's when the real pain begins. That's when love triggers the deepest wounds, because suddenly the person we trusted to heal us is doing exactly what our original caregiver did. They're letting us down. They're not meeting our needs. They're proving that love is unsafe, that connection is conditional, that we are once again alone. But they're not doing any of that. They're just being human, imperfect, limited, carrying their own pain. The wound we feel is not being inflicted by them. It's being revealed by them. The pain was always there, dormant, waiting for intimacy to activate it. And now that it's activated, we have a choice. We can blame the other person, leave the relationship, and seek someone new who will trigger the same wound in a slightly different way. We can repeat the pattern until we die, never understanding why love always ends in pain. Or we can do something radical, something terrifying, something that might actually change everything. We can turn toward the wound. We can ask not, what is this person doing to me? But what is this pain trying to tell me about myself? We can begin the real work of love, not finding someone to complete us, but becoming whole enough to truly meet another person. But before we get there, before we can discuss healing, we must first descend into the full reality of the wound. We must understand not just where it comes from, but how it operates, how it hijacks our nervous system, how it creates the very rejection we fear, how it turns love into a battlefield. We must enter the conflict, the crisis, the place where everything falls apart so it can be rebuilt on honest ground. There is a moment in every intimate relationship when the mask falls, when the projection shatters, when the dream of perfect union collides with the reality of two separate, wounded human beings trying to navigate the impossible complexity of truly seeing each other. Some call it the power struggle phase, others call it disillusionment. I call it the descent, because that's what it feels like, isn't it? A falling, a darkening, the bright promise of early love giving way to confusion, disappointment, and a growing sense that something has gone terribly wrong. The person who once made you feel seen now makes you feel invisible. The one who promised safety now triggers your deepest fear. The relationship that was supposed to heal you is somehow making every wound worse, and the question pounds in your chest like a second heartbeat. Why does this keep happening? Let me take you inside the neuroscience of triggering, because understanding this is like watching the hidden machinery of your own suffering become visible. When you experience a threat in the present, your partner's tone of voice, their withdrawal, their criticism, your brain doesn't distinguish between physical and emotional danger. The amygdala, that ancient alarm system deep in the limbic brain, registers threat and initiates the stress response. Cortisol floods your system, your heart rate spikes, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought, perspective, and emotional regulation, goes partially offline. This is the fight, flight, freeze response. It evolved to help us escape predators. But in modern relationships, it gets triggered by something far more subtle, the perception of rejection or abandonment. Here's where it gets devastating. Your amygdala doesn't just respond to present danger. It's connected to your hippocampus, where memories are stored. And when something in the present resembles something from your past, even slightly, even unconsciously, the hippocampus activates old emotional memories. Not the explicit narrative memories you can consciously access, but implicit somatic memories stored in your body. So when your partner seems distant, it's not just that moment you're responding to. Your nervous system is also remembering every time your mother was depressed and emotionally unavailable, every time your father worked late and missed dinner, every childhood experience of loneliness and unmet need. But you don't know this. You're not aware that you've time traveled. From your subjective experience, you're simply responding to your partner's behavior. You feel hurt, rejected, angry, or panicked. And those feelings seem entirely justified by the present situation, but they're not entirely about the present. They're amplified by the past. What would be a minor disappointment for someone with a secure attachment history becomes a catastrophic threat for someone with an insecure one. A delayed text message becomes evidence of abandonment. A need for space becomes proof of rejection. A forgotten errand becomes confirmation that you don't matter. The present trigger activates the past wound, and suddenly you're not a functioning adult having a disagreement with your partner. You're a terrified child, convinced you're about to be abandoned, fighting for your psychological survival. This is what psychologists call emotional flooding. Your physiological arousal becomes so intense that you literally cannot think clearly. Research by John Gottman shows that when your heart rate exceeds 100 beats per minute during conflict, your ability to process information, show empathy, or engage in creative problem-solving plummets. You become reactive instead of responsive, defensive instead of curious. You say and do things you'll later regret, not because you're a bad person, but because your nervous system has been hijacked by ancient survival mechanisms. And here's the cruelest part. Your reactivity often triggers your partner's reactivity. Their defenses activate yours. Your protest behavior, the crying, demanding, pursuing, activates their withdrawal. Their withdrawal intensifies your panic. And suddenly you're locked in what psychologists call a negative cycle, a self-perpetuating loop of mutual triggering where both people are simultaneously victim and perpetrator, both defending against threat and inadvertently creating it. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. Imagine a couple, Sarah and Michael. Sarah is anxiously attached. Michael is avoidant. Neither of them knows this. They just know they're in love and that love has started to hurt. Sarah needs reassurance. When she's stressed, her attachment system activates and she seeks proximity to Michael. She wants to talk about the relationship. She needs to feel close, connected, certain of his love. This is her nervous system trying to regulate itself through connection, a perfectly reasonable need shaped by a childhood where her mother's affection was inconsistent. But Michael experiences Sarah's need as pressure. His attachment system learned that emotional intensity is dangerous, that vulnerability leads to engulfment, that the safest place is inside his own fortress. When Sarah pursues, Michael withdraws. He gets quiet. He needs space. He suggests they talk about it later. In his mind, he's being reasonable, mature, giving himself time to process. He doesn't understand that to Sarah, his withdrawal is a mirror of every time her mother turned away, every childhood moment when her bids for connection were rejected. Sarah feels Michael pulling away and panics. Her anxiety spikes. She pursues harder. She needs to know what he's thinking, whether he's angry, whether he still loves her. Her questions feel to her like reasonable attempts at connection. But to Michael, they feel like an interrogation. He feels trapped, smothered, pressured. So he withdraws further. Maybe he leaves the room. Maybe he looks at his phone. Maybe he says, "I need some space." And in that moment, Sarah's worst fear is confirmed. He doesn't want her. He's leaving. The original abandonment is happening again. Her nervous system floods with panic. She might cry or raise her voice or follow him, desperately trying to re-establish connection, because connection is safety, and without it, she's falling into an abyss of terror that makes no rational sense but feels absolutely real. Michael experiences her intensity as attack. His walls go higher. He might say something cutting, "You're being crazy," or "Why are you always so needy?" He doesn't mean to wound her. He's trying to protect himself, but his words land like knives, confirming Sarah's deepest belief about herself. She's too much. She's unlovable. Her needs are the problem. They're now fully in the negative cycle. Sarah's protest behavior triggers Michael's withdrawal, which triggers more intense protest from Sarah, which triggers more extreme withdrawal from Michael. Neither of them understands that they're not really fighting about what they think they're fighting about. They're not fighting about whether to talk now or later. They're fighting about whether connection is safe, whether needs will be met, whether love can be trusted. They're fighting the same fight they've been fighting since childhood, just with a different person playing the role of the one who lets them down. This is what couples therapist Sue Johnson calls the demon dialogues, the destructive patterns that emerge when two people's attachment wounds collide. She identifies 3 primary patterns. Find the bad guy, where both partners blame each other and fight for the moral high ground. Protest Polka, the pursue-withdraw dance where one person escalates while the other distance. Freeze and flee, where both people give up and exist in cold, silent resignation. All three patterns are defenses against vulnerability, because vulnerability is the very thing that triggers the wound. To be vulnerable, to show your true self, your needs, your fears, your pain, is to risk the original rejection. It's to become, once again, that small child reaching out, not knowing if someone will be there. Carl Jung wrote that what we resist persists and what we accept transforms. The shadow, those parts of ourselves we've disowned, denied, or repressed, doesn't disappear. It follows us. An intimate relationship is the arena where the shadow makes its appearance most dramatically, because in love, we don't just project our positive ideals onto another person. We also project our shadow material, all the aspects of ourselves we can't acknowledge or accept. The very traits we criticize most harshly in our partner are often the traits we've repressed in ourselves. The person who hates neediness in their partner is often running from their own unacknowledged dependency. The one who criticizes their partner's anger is often terrified of their own rage. The one who complains about emotional distance may themselves be avoiding their fear of true intimacy. Jung called this the mirror effect. Your partner becomes a mirror reflecting back not who you are, but who you refuse to see that you are. And the intensity of your reaction, the disproportionate rage, the overwhelming disappointment, the devastating hurt, is a signal, a message from your unconscious saying, "This is yours, this belongs to you, this is the work you came here to do." But we don't want to hear that message. It's so much easier to believe the problem is out there, that if our partner would just change, just be different, just love us the right way, everything would be fine. The ego protects itself through externalization, attributing our internal conflicts to external sources. Your partner becomes the reason you're unhappy, instead of the catalyst revealing pre-existing unhappiness. They become the problem rather than the mirror showing you the work you've been avoiding, and so we stay stuck, repeating the same arguments, pushing the same buttons, locked in the same patterns that our parents were locked in, that their parents were locked in, going back generations. The wound passing from one generation to the next like genetic code, never examined, never healed, just endlessly repeated. There's another dimension to this we must examine, darker and more troubling. Sometimes love doesn't just trigger old wounds, it creates new ones. Sometimes the person we love doesn't just accidentally activate our pain, they deliberately inflict it. This is the territory of trauma bonding, when the relationship itself becomes a source of injury rather than healing. When love and fear become so entangled that you can't tell the difference anymore. Trauma bonding occurs through intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable alternation between affection and abuse, warmth and withdrawal, idealization and devaluation. This creates one of the most powerful psychological bonds humans can experience. The uncertainty keeps the attachment system in a state of hyperactivation. The victim becomes addicted to the moments of kindness, forever hoping the good version of their partner will return permanently, unable to leave despite mounting evidence that they should. It's the psychology of the slot machine applied to relationship. The occasional reward, the moment of tenderness after cruelty, the apology after the outburst, becomes more powerful than consistent kindness would ever be. Because the nervous system is primed for threat, the relief from threat floods the brain with dopamine and oxytocin, creating a chemical high that feels like love, but is actually the temporary cessation of fear. If you are in a relationship where you feel afraid, where your needs are consistently dismissed, where you're made to doubt your own perception of reality, where affection is used as a weapon to control you, that is not the wound of attachment being triggered. That is active abuse. And the work is different. The work is not to understand your partner's behavior or heal the dynamic. The work is to leave, to save yourself, to understand that some relationships are not meant to be transformed, but escaped. I say this because one of the cruelest distortions of psychological awareness is when people use it to justify staying in harmful situations, when they tell themselves, "This is just my attachment wound being triggered," when actually they're being systematically harmed. Knowledge of psychology is not a reason to endure mistreatment. It's a tool for discernment, understanding which pain is old wound surfacing to be healed, and which is new injury being inflicted in real time. But in relationships that are not abusive, in partnerships where both people are genuinely trying, where the love is real even if the pain is also real, the wound that love triggers is an invitation, an opportunity, a chance to finally address the unfinished business of our becoming. Because here's what's actually happening beneath the surface of all that conflict and hurt. Your unconscious is trying to complete your development. The psyche has an inherent drive toward wholeness. It will keep presenting you with situations that activate your immature or underdeveloped parts, not to torture you, but to give you another chance to grow. You keep choosing emotionally unavailable partners because some part of you knows you need to learn to validate yourself instead of seeking it externally. You keep ending up in relationships where you feel controlled because you need to develop your own sense of agency and boundaries. You keep attracting drama because you haven't yet learned to tolerate the vulnerability of stable intimacy. The repetition isn't punishment, it's curriculum. The question is whether we're willing to be taught, whether we can move beyond blame and victimhood and recognize that our pain contains intelligence, that our triggers are maps, that the way we suffer in relationship reveals exactly where our consciousness needs to expand. This is the point where many relationships end, when the pain becomes too much, when the wound feels too deep, when the work seems too hard. We leave, convinced that the problem was the person or the relationship. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes ending is the only honest response to incompatibility or harm. But sometimes we leave too soon, before the wound has spoken its full message, before the pain has revealed its purpose, before we've allowed the relationship to become what it came to be, not a romance, not a rescue, but a crucible, a transformative fire that burns away everything false until only the truth of who we are remains. The ancient alchemists spoke of something called the nigredo, the blackening phase of the alchemical process. Before lead could be transformed into gold, it had to be broken down, dissolved, reduced to its most basic elements. It had to be destroyed before it could be recreated in a higher form. This is the dark night of the soul in relationship, the period where everything you believed about love is challenged, where your defenses are stripped away, where you can no longer pretend, perform, or hide, where the carefully constructed persona you present to the world and to yourself crumbles, revealing the raw, wounded, terrified creature beneath. It's excruciating. It feels like failure. It looks like everything falling apart. But what if it's not falling apart? What if it's falling together into truth, into authenticity, into the possibility of something real? What if the wound love triggers is not the end of the story, but the beginning of your actual life? To answer that, we must leave behind the battlefield and enter new territory. We must move from the conflict to the awakening, from the descent to the emergence, from the wound as problem to the wound as portal. We must discover what happens when we stop running from our pain and instead learn to meet it with consciousness, with compassion, with the radical willingness to be transformed by what we find there. There is a story that appears in various forms across different wisdom traditions. In the Sumerian myth, the goddess Inanna descends to the underworld and must pass through 7 gates. At each gate, she must remove a piece of her clothing or jewelry, her external power and protection, until she arrives before her sister, the dark goddess Ereshkigal, completely naked and vulnerable. Only then can the true transformation occur. In the Greek tradition, Persephone is dragged into the underworld by Hades. Her mother Demeter, goddess of harvest and growth, grieves so deeply that nothing grows on earth until her daughter returns. But Persephone does not return unchanged. She has eaten the pomegranate seeds. She is no longer purely of the upper world. She now moves between realms, between light and dark, between innocence and knowing. These myths are not just stories. They are maps of psychological transformation. They describe what must happen when we encounter the deepest parts of ourselves, the parts we've been running from, the parts that love forces us to face. We must descend. We must strip away our defenses. We must meet the dark sister, the shadow, the wound, and we must be willing to stay there long enough to be changed. This is the moment many people miss in relationship. They reach the pain and immediately decide, this is wrong, this needs to stop, I need to leave or fix this or make it different. They treat the wound like an enemy to be defeated rather than a teacher to be heard. But what if we approached it differently? What if, instead of asking, how do I make this pain go away, we asked, what is this pain trying to teach me? Let me tell you about the practice that changes everything: conscious relationship. It's a term that's been used by various therapists and teachers, but the core idea is simple and profound. Instead of relating unconsciously, projecting, reacting, defending, you learn to relate with awareness. You learn to recognize when you've been triggered. You learn to pause before reacting. You learn to distinguish between past and present, between what's actually happening and what your nervous system is telling you is happening based on old data. This requires something most of us have never been taught: the ability to witness ourselves, to observe our own reactions with curiosity rather than judgment, to notice when our heart rate is elevated, when our thoughts are catastrophizing, when we're about to say or do something we'll regret. It requires what psychologists call mentalization, the capacity to reflect on your own mental states and the mental states of others, to hold the awareness that you are having an experience shaped by your history that may not accurately reflect objective reality. I'll tell you what this looks like in practice. You're in the middle of an argument. Your partner has said something that feels devastating. Every cell in your body is screaming at you to defend, to attack, to flee. Your attachment wound has been hit directly, but instead of reacting immediately, you do something radical. You pause, you take a breath, and you ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And is what I'm feeling proportional to what just happened? Maybe your partner said they need alone time tonight. Your reaction is panic, abandonment, the certainty that they're pulling away, that this is the beginning of the end. But when you pause and really look at it, you realize your partner regularly needs alone time. They've always been this way. They're not leaving. They're just being consistent with who they are. The panic you feel, that's old. That's the you at 7 years old when your dad left for a business trip and you thought he wasn't coming back. That's not about tonight. That's about then. This awareness, this simple recognition that your feeling is real but not fully relevant to the present, is revolutionary. It creates space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl famously wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." But noticing the trigger is only the first step. The real work is what comes next, feeling the wound without acting from it. This is what therapists call affect tolerance, the capacity to experience difficult emotions without immediately needing to discharge them through action, to feel abandoned without desperately clinging, to feel angry without attacking, to feel afraid without defending. It means sitting with the discomfort, letting the feeling move through you like a wave, breathing into it instead of running from it. And in that space of feeling without acting, something extraordinary happens. The emotion begins to speak. The wound begins to reveal its history. You might find yourself remembering moments from childhood you haven't thought about in years. You might hear the voice of a younger version of yourself, still waiting for something that never came. You might realize that the person you're angry at is not actually your partner, but your mother, your father, the bully from school, the first person who broke your heart. The wound wants to be seen. It wants to be acknowledged. It wants to finally, after all these years, be given the attention it deserved when it was first inflicted. And here's the profound paradox. The moment you truly see the wound for what it is, the moment you recognize it as yours, as old, as something that can be held with compassion, it loses much of its power over you, not all at once. Healing is not linear. The trigger will still activate in the future. But each time you meet it with awareness rather than reactivity, with curiosity rather than defense, you weaken the neural pathway that connects present events to past wounds. You literally rewire your brain. Neuroscience confirms this. The process is called memory reconsolidation. When a memory is activated, there's a brief window, usually a few hours, where that memory becomes malleable again. If you bring new information or a new emotional experience to the memory during that window, you can actually update it. You can give your past self what they needed. Not by changing what happened, you can't do that, but by providing, from your adult self to your child self, the understanding, the compassion, the validation that was missing. This is what it means to reparent yourself, to become for yourself what your caregivers couldn't be, to offer your own wounded parts the consistent presence, the unconditional acceptance, the attuned attention that creates secure attachment. And as you do this work, as you learn to meet your own needs, to validate your own feelings, to provide your own security, something miraculous happens in your relationship. You stop needing your partner to complete you. You stop demanding that they heal your childhood wounds. You stop projecting your unmet needs onto them and then resenting them for not meeting those needs. You start to see them, the actual person, with their own wounds, their own fears, their own attachment history that has nothing to do with you. Compassion arises, not the sentimental kind that enables bad behavior, but the deep kind that recognizes we are all wounded. We are all doing our best with the tools we were given. We are all trying to get our needs met with strategies we learned before we could speak. Jung called this the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are by integrating all the disowned parts of yourself. The shadow, the wound, the vulnerable child, the defended adolescent, the self-protective adult, all of it. Owned, conscious, no longer running the show from beneath awareness, but brought into the light where it can be transformed. And paradoxically, as you become more individuated, more whole within yourself, you become more capable of genuine intimacy. Because now you're not relating to another person to fill your emptiness. You're relating from a place of relative fullness. You're choosing connection rather than needing it for survival. This is what psychoanalyst Erich Fromm meant when he wrote about the difference between immature love and mature love. Immature love says, I love you because I need you. Mature love says, I need you because I love you. In the first, need comes first. The other person is a means to an end, the end being your own regulation, completion, healing. In the second, love comes first. You see the other person for who they are, not for what they can do for you. And from that seeing, from that genuine recognition of their separate existence and inherent value, need emerges. Not the need of dependence, but the need of interdependence. Remember Sarah and Michael? Let's return to them. But this time imagine they've done the work. They've each begun to understand their own attachment patterns. They've learned to recognize when they're triggered. Sarah feels Michael pulling away. The panic starts to rise, but instead of immediately pursuing, she pauses. She recognizes the feeling, abandonment, terror, the black hole of not mattering. She knows this feeling. She's been here before many times, and it's always about her childhood, not about Michael. So she does something new. She puts her hand on her heart. She breathes. She says to herself silently, I see you. I know you're scared, but we're safe. Michael isn't leaving. He just needs space like he always does. And that's okay. She doesn't make the panic wrong. She doesn't try to force it away. She just holds it, like a parent soothing a frightened child, and after a few minutes the intensity decreases. Not completely. The feeling is still there, but it's manageable now. She can think again. And then she does something even more radical. She goes to Michael, and instead of demanding reassurance or criticizing him for withdrawing, she shares her vulnerability. She says, hey, I noticed you seem like you need some space, and I'm aware that triggers old abandonment feelings for me. I'm working on it. I don't need you to fix how I feel, but I wanted you to know that's what's happening inside me. Michael hears this differently than he would have heard her previous protests. She's not attacking him. She's not making him responsible for her feelings. She's just sharing her internal experience with openness and ownership, and because she's not attacking, he doesn't need to defend. His wall doesn't go up. Instead, his own work kicks in. He recognizes his pattern: withdraw, create distance, protect. He knows it comes from his own wound, the smothering, intrusive parent who never respected boundaries. So he responds, thank you for telling me. You're right that I need some time alone, but it's not about you. I'm just overwhelmed and need to reset. It's my pattern, I know I pull away. Can we check in again in an hour? And Sarah, instead of panicking at the hour part, recognizes that this is growth. He's not just disappearing. He's being clear about his need and offering connection afterward. This is him working with his pattern, not being controlled by it. She says, yeah, that works. I'll work on soothing myself while you have your space. Do you see what just happened? They're still having their respective reactions. Their attachment wounds are still active, but they're not at the mercy of those wounds anymore. They're working with them, naming them, taking responsibility for them, and in doing so, they're breaking the cycle. This is what healing in relationship looks like. Not perfection, not the absence of triggers, but conscious engagement with the triggers, mutual responsibility, the willingness to see your own contribution to the dynamic rather than only seeing your partner's. And here's what becomes possible when both people do this work. The relationship transforms from a battleground into a sanctuary, from a place where wounds are unconsciously inflicted into a place where wounds are consciously healed. You begin to use the relationship as a laboratory for growth. Each conflict becomes an opportunity to practice new responses. Each trigger becomes a chance to do one more repetition of the healing exercise. Pause, breathe, witness, choose. The relationship becomes, in the language of Buddhist psychology, a Dharma gate, a doorway to awakening. Not because it's always easy or pleasurable, but because it reveals exactly where your consciousness is still bound by unconscious patterns. Your partner becomes your greatest teacher, not because they're perfect, but because they see you more clearly than anyone else. They see through your persona, your defenses, your carefully curated self-image. They see your shadow, and if you're both committed to the work, they can help you see it too, not through criticism, but through honest reflection. This is how you shut down when you're overwhelmed. This is how you deflect with humor when things get real. This is how you make everything about other people and avoid your own feelings. These observations, delivered with compassion rather than contempt, become mirrors, ways of seeing yourself that are otherwise impossible, because you're too close to your own patterns to notice them. This is the promise hidden inside the wound. This is why love triggers the deepest pain, because it also offers the deepest healing. but only if we're willing to work with it consciously, only if we can move beyond the victim story, beyond blame, beyond the fantasy that the right person won't trigger us. Everyone will trigger you. Every intimate relationship will activate your wound. That's not a bug. That's a feature. That's how the psyche works. It uses relationship to complete your development. The question is not whether you'll be wounded in love. The question is whether you'll use that wounding to finally become whole. And here's where this becomes even larger than personal healing. When you do this work, you don't just transform yourself and your relationship. You transform your lineage. You break intergenerational patterns of trauma that have been passed down unconsciously for generations. Your mother couldn't give you the attunement you needed because she didn't receive it from her mother. Your father couldn't model emotional availability because his father taught him that feelings are weakness. The patterns go back, repeating, until someone has the courage to see them and say, "This ends with me." When you learn to meet your own needs, when you stop demanding that your partner heal what your parents broke, when you take full responsibility for your own emotional regulation, you become the alchemist. You transform pain into wisdom, wound into gift, unconsciousness into awareness. And if you have children, or if you influence children in any way, you offer them something revolutionary, the modeling of secure attachment earned through effort. You show them that wounds don't have to define us, that patterns can be broken, that consciousness can transform suffering. This is how we evolve, not through transcending our humanity, but through fully inhabiting it, through meeting our shadow, our wound, our pain with the kind of courageous presence that allows transformation to occur. The deepest wound of love is not that it hurts us. The deepest wound is that we spend so much of our lives avoiding the pain instead of learning from it. We run from relationship to relationship, looking for someone who won't trigger us. Or we stay in relationships and blame our partner for the pain that was always ours to hold. We waste years, sometimes entire lifetimes, waiting for love to be easy, to be safe, to be what we fantasized it would be. But what if we stopped waiting? What if we accepted that love is supposed to be hard, not because it's flawed, but because it's profound? What if we understood that the difficulty is not a problem to be solved, but a process to be honored? What if we finally, bravely, completely said yes to the wound? Not yes to abuse, not yes to mistreatment, but yes to the legitimate pain of two separate beings trying to create connection. Yes to the triggers that reveal our work. Yes to the discomfort of being truly seen. Yes to growth over comfort, truth over fantasy, becoming over arriving. This is the invitation love offers, not the promise of completion, but the possibility of wholeness, not the rescue from pain, but the meaning found within it. And if we can accept this invitation, if we can move through the wound with consciousness and courage, we discover something that no one told us in all those fairy tales and romance movies. We discover that love was never meant to make us happy. It was meant to make us whole. And those two things are not the same, but whole is better. Whole is truer. Whole is the only foundation on which lasting happiness can ever be built. We have traveled far together, from the primal separation of birth to the complex dance of adult attachment, from the neuroscience of triggering to the archetypal patterns of the psyche, from the battlefield of unconscious relationship to the sanctuary of conscious connection. And what have we discovered? That love triggers the deepest wounds, not despite being love, but because it is love. Because love is the force that brings us closest to another human being, and therefore closest to the truth of our own incompleteness, our own history, our own unhealed parts. Every person we love becomes a mirror. In their eyes, we see not just them, but ourselves, our beauty and our brokenness, our capacity for connection and our patterns of defense, our deep longing for union and our deeper terror of being truly known. The great paradox of human existence is that we are simultaneously individuals and social creatures. We need others to survive, yet we are irreducibly alone inside our own consciousness. We long for perfect understanding, yet we can never fully know another person's subjective experience. We seek completion in relationship, yet we can only be whole within ourselves. This tension, this fundamental contradiction, is the source of our suffering in love, but it's also the source of our growth. Because in wrestling with this paradox, in learning to hold both our need for connection and our responsibility for self, in developing the capacity to be vulnerable while also being boundaried, to be open while also being sovereign, we become more fully human. We develop what the psychologists call differentiation, the ability to be close to another person without losing yourself, to maintain your own center while being genuinely moved by another's experience. This is emotional maturity. This is the fruit of the wound consciously engaged. I want to offer you a reframing that might change how you see every relationship pain you've ever experienced. What if your wounds are not flaws? What if they're not evidence that you're broken or unlovable or damaged beyond repair? What if they're simply the places where you've not yet fully learned to love yourself? The place where you seek constant reassurance is the place where you haven't yet learned to trust your own worth. The place where you defend and distance is the place where you haven't yet learned that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. The place where you people please and self-abandon is the place where you haven't yet learned that your needs matter as much as anyone else's. The wound is not a mistake. It's a map. It's showing you exactly where your consciousness needs to expand, where your self-love needs to deepen, where your capacity for presence needs to grow. The mystics and the sages have always known what neuroscience is now confirming. Consciousness evolves through challenge, not through comfort. The oyster creates the pearl by wrapping layers of beauty around an irritant. The lotus grows through mud to bloom on the water's surface. The human psyche transforms through the alchemical process of embracing, not avoiding, its own shadow. Love is the irritant. The relationship is the mud. And you, conscious, witnessing, courageously willing to see yourself clearly, you are the alchemist. No one can do this work for you. Your partner cannot heal your attachment wound by loving you better, though their love may create the safe enough space for you to heal it yourself. Your therapist cannot do it for you, though they can guide you. Your children cannot do it by needing you, though they may motivate you. The work is yours. The wound is yours. And therefore the transformation is yours. If you are in pain right now, if you're in a relationship that hurts, or if you're alone and wondering if love will ever feel safe, I want you to hear this. Your pain is not pointless. It is not evidence that you're doing it wrong, or that love is a lie, or that you're too broken to be in relationship. Your pain is information. It's your psyche's way of saying, there is work here. There is growth available here. There is something in you that is ready to heal if you're brave enough to look. The question is never, why does this hurt so much? The question is, what is this hurt trying to teach me? And the answer is almost always some variation of, you are trying to get from another person what you need to give to yourself. You are trying to heal in relationship what must first be healed within yourself. You are seeking completion when the real invitation is to wholeness. We live in a culture that tells us love should be easy, that if it's the right person, it won't be hard. That pain in relationship means something is wrong, that we should leave, that we deserve better. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes the pain is not old wound being activated, but new harm being inflicted. Sometimes the work is not to stay and heal, but to leave and preserve your well-being. But more often, far more often, the pain is the labor of becoming, the discomfort of growth, the necessary friction of two separate beings learning to create something together without losing themselves in the process. And that work is sacred, that struggle is meaningful, that pain is purposeful. It's the pain of evolution, of consciousness expanding to include more complexity, more nuance, more truth, of the heart breaking open instead of breaking down, of the self being dismantled so it can be rebuilt on an honest foundation. There is a concept in Japanese aesthetics called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, the repair makes them visible, beautiful, celebrated. The object becomes more valuable because it has been broken and mended. This is what can happen with your wounds if you work with them consciously. The places where you were broken become the places where the light gets in. The places where you were hurt become the places where you develop your greatest compassion. The places where you were abandoned become the places where you learn to show up for yourself. Your wound, worked with courage and consciousness, becomes your wisdom. Your pain, metabolized through awareness, becomes your power. Your breaking becomes your becoming. So when love triggers your deepest wound, don't run. Don't immediately leave. Don't blame your partner or yourself. Don't decide that pain means you failed. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, what is this pain showing me about myself, about my history, about the work I came here to do? And then, with whatever courage you can muster, turn toward the wound instead of away from it. Meet it with curiosity instead of judgment. Hold it with compassion instead of contempt. Because that wound, that tender, terrified, aching place inside you, has been waiting your entire life for this moment, for you to finally stop running, for you to finally turn around and see it, for you to finally offer it what it needed but never received, your own loving presence. The wound that love triggers is the wound that love came to heal. But love can only heal it if you do the work, if you show up, if you stay conscious, if you choose growth over comfort, truth over fantasy, wholeness over the illusion of completion. This is the real romance, not the fantasy of perfect union, but the reality of two imperfect people, both wounded, both working, both willing to use their relationship as a crucible for transformation. This is the love that lasts, not because it doesn't hurt, but because both people are willing to work with the hurt consciously. Not because it's easy, but because they understand that the difficulty contains the meaning. Not because they found the right person, but because they're becoming the right person, whole, awake, responsible for their own healing. So I leave you with this question, not to answer immediately, but to carry with you. What would become possible in your life, in your relationships, in your sense of self, in your capacity for joy and connection and peace, if you stopped treating your wounds as problems to be fixed and started seeing them as invitations to become who you were always meant to be? The answer to that question is the answer to why you're here, why you've suffered the way you've suffered, why love has hurt the way it's hurt. The wound was never the end of the story. It was always the beginning, and you are standing at the threshold now, deciding whether to cross it. The choice, as always, is yours. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. May you find the courage to meet your wounds with consciousness. May you find the compassion to hold them with gentleness. And may you discover, as I have discovered, that the deepest pain often contains the deepest truth. And that truth, when finally faced, will set you free.